So today we are meeting here and we have the pleasure to have Eva Constantaras and Michael Salzwedel. Michael, I never know how to say your name, but your last name. They are both pandemic mentors for us and internews media trainers and data journalists. So they are going to host the webinar on data journalism and storytelling, particularly with a focus on health for you today. And I'm very excited this is our second webinar. Thank you for registering for the Health Journalism Network and for joining these webinars. Just as a reminder, I'm going to drop an evaluation form towards the end of the webinar today. And if you can fill that out, it'll just take a few minutes. It will give us a sense of how you liked it and what are some of the things we can improve and other topics that you might be interested in. So without further ado, I would like Michael to get started. I think he has an icebreaker, and Eva, maybe they can say a few things about themselves. Over to you.
So much, everyone.
Michael, we can't hear you.
How about now?
Yes, now
okay.
we can.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thanks, Beatrice, and thanks, everyone, for joining this HJN Internews Health Journalism Network webinar. We're hoping to get through some really good stuff today, all about data journalism, which I'm sure is a term you have come across to some extent. It's becoming an increasingly important part of what newsrooms are doing as we grapple with the pandemic and other issues in life. So today's slides, which Eva and I will be going through, are available for you to download and view at your leisure on whichever device you prefer by going to the link that you see on your screen at the moment, bit.ly/HJN14Jan. That you can just note down, and that will take you to, like I said, the slides we're going through today. And in the slides are a lot of links to the various stories and tools that we're going to be talking about. So no need to scribble down furiously or make notes. You can just go to that link, and then all the links to the tools and resources will be included in there. If you have any comments or questions you want to ask at any time, please feel completely free to drop those into the text chat. We'll be monitoring that as well throughout the hour or the hour and a half. We'll see how we get along. And if you want to ask something, you can raise your hand, and if we have time, we can take a round of audio questions as well. So just to get going, while the last few people still join, it is now 6 minutes past. Let's get going. We're going to start off with a quiz on a platform called Kahoot, which some of you might be familiar with. How it works is that you, on your phone or in a window on your browser, on your whatever device you're using, go to the website kahoot.it, which you can see on the screen right now. It's going to ask you to put in the game pin, which you can see on this team screen is 1634332. So on your phone, you're going to kahoot.it, or on a browser tab on your computer, any device that you have easy access to. Once you are at kahoot.it, it will ask you for a game pin, which is on the screen right now, and it will ask you for your name or your nickname so we can see who's who. Normally in a physical training, when I do this, we have prizes, chocolates or something, but unfortunately, virtual chocolate doesn't really taste like much. So no prizes today, just bragging rights. So how it's going to work is that there's 6 questions. They're all multiple choice. You will see the question in your Teams screen, on your Teams screen, and you'll be able to answer using your phone or your browser tab. So I can see that TV has joined and Blandine has joined as well. Pinky, welcome. Muralik Krishan is in. Thank you, Muralik Krishan. Bea has just joined. I wonder if Eva's going to join. Carol is in. That's great. You guys are getting the hang of it. We've already got 7 people in. That's great. Just give it another minute. 9 people in the game so far. That's great. And it's got a little bit of a song as well, which is nice. I wonder if you can hear that. It's not very loud. Okay. All right, so 10 of you in. Ray, Jen, Timur, Syrian, Carol, Bea, Muralishan, Pinky, TB, and Valentine. Is anyone having any issues? I'm just going to check the chat quickly. Okay, 11, that's great. Give it another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll start. If you've just joined this meeting, use your phone, go to kahoot.it, to the game pin you see on the screen, your nickname, and then you'll be in the quiz. Okay, we've got 12 participants, so I think we're going to start this quiz. It's all about data journalism. A lot of the questions are going to be covered in the contents of today's session. So this is just ready to test your knowledge ahead of the session to see how many answers you managed. So the idea is to choose the correct answer, but also to be quick. The quicker you are, the more points you get. The more points you get, the better your chance of winning the game. Okay. So get ready. Here's the first question coming up. Okay, you get 30 seconds to answer each question, by the way. Okay, so here is the question. It will jump to the top of the screen, and there are your possible multiple choice answers. On your phone, you will see a red, blue, green, or yellow button. Tap the button you think is the correct answer. On the right, we can see how many people have answered. On the left, we can see how much time left. This question is all about your workflow as a journalist. When you're working with data, what's your most common workflow? So that time ran out really quickly, but 6 of you answered and 4 of you got it right. The correct workflow, or the most common workflow, is to find your data, then clean it so you can work with it, then analyze it, and then visualize it. The rest of the answers were not correct. We don't want to delete our data. We don't want to forget about it. And we don't want to first visualize it. The first thing to do is to find relevant data, reliable data, clean it, refine it, analyze it, and then visualize it. That's the process. So well done to the 4 of you who got that right. In first position so far, we've got Muralishan, who got the correct answer and got it the quickest out of anyone. Bea second, Syrian, and then Pinky. So let's see how that changes with the next question. How much does it cost to produce good data journalism? Typo there, sorry. It should read many, many millions, not many more millions. Too much, only big organizations can afford to do good data journalism. It's possible to do it with a very small budget, or it's $500 a year for a data journal license. 4 of you said it was $500 a year for the data journal license. There's no such thing. You don't need a license to do data journalism. Anyone can do it, so long as you're doing it, credibly and reliably. So there's no such thing as a data journal license. 5 of you said that it's possible to do it with a very small budget. That is very true. Okay, so staying in first position is Muralishan. Pinky is now chasing him down with 1,200 points, followed by TV, then Jen, and then Bea. So it's still anyone's game. Let's go to the next question. Question 3 of 6. When you're working with data, which of these questions are important to ask yourself? When you're trying to produce data journalism, what should you ask yourself? Who collected and published the data? How old is the data? How was it collected? Or are these all important questions? Got to be quick. Time's up already. Got to be on top of it. 8 of you got it correct. That is the right answer. All of these are important. It's important to know how that data was produced, who published it, how it was collected, the methodologies, and also obviously how old it is. Sometimes you might be working with a data set that is now out of date and therefore irrelevant. So be careful of that as well. Okay, Muralikrishnan is forging ahead. Can anyone chase him down? Pinky, TB, we're looking at you. Jen? Let's go. Fourth question. Which of the following programs, software programs, are best for working with data? Which of these programs should you be using when you're using data as a journalist? Photoshop, MS Word, Excel or Google Sheets, or Adobe Acrobats? Boom. Okay, that's good. Almost all of you got that right. One said Photoshop. Interesting. I guess for the visualizations, maybe, but generally when we're working with data, we're going to be using Excel or Google Sheets. Okay, that's the situation. Pinky's still second, and we've got Ray and Blandine also coming up from behind. We've got 2 questions left. Is that enough for Pinky or TB to snatch the lead from Muralikrishnan? We shall soon see. Second last question. What is metadata? Let's see if any of you know this. What is metadata? Data in another universe. Data that can't be analyzed. Data that describes a data set or all the records in a data set. The correct answer is data that describes a data set. In other words, what is the title of that data set? What is the description? Who is the publisher? What is the date it was released? What methodologies were used? So it's information that describes the data that exists in a data set. And all good data sets will have that metadata. If you find data that does not have that information that describes it, it's difficult to trust that data set. Next. Okay, so not much change at the top there. Muralikrishnan, you're one answer away from victory in the HJN Data Journal webinar. Put that on your CV. Okay, let's see. What last question? It's question 6. What is open data? When we talk about open and closed data, what do we mean when we talk about open data? Is it government data? Is it non-government data? Is it data that anyone can access? Or is it data that can be sold for a profit? Okay, so it is data that anyone can access. Open data refers to data that has been made freely available, which in both senses of the word, it doesn't cost you money to access that data, and you don't have to be a member of any organization. You don't need to make any arrangements with people to get hold of that data. It is freely available online, and it does not have a cost associated with it. So that is what we're looking for: good, reliable, open sources of data. Okay, that's it. Let's have a look at the podium. In third place today is TB. Well done, TB. Second place, Pinky. And first place, Muralikrishnan. Well done, sir, on your excellent victory in this quiz. Okay, so that was just a little bit of fun to get us started off, and I hope you learned something from that, and it got you in the mood for what's about to come up next. Okay, let's switch back over to the slides. So I think Eva is going to take us through 2 possible definitions of what is data journalism. Eva.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us about learning about data journalism. I know there's a lot of different definitions of data journalism that you may have heard, and we're not really picky. But what we want you to realize is that data isn't just about technology, it isn't just about a tool, it's also about the story. It's also about an investigative process and the story that comes out of that process. So Paul Bradshaw, who's one of the leading educators about data journalism, really tells us that we have to approach both the tools and the story process with skepticism. Just like any other source of information, data can be flawed. So this webinar is really focused on how can you approach data and data journalism with both optimism and skepticism so that you can be an effective data journalist. And then we have another definition here by Simon Rogers, who is founder of the Guardian Data blog, which is one of the cheapest and scrappiest startup data teams to come out in the early days of data journalism. And again, it focuses on combining different journalism techniques that it can include visualization, it can include narrative, and it can include technology. And the goal of data journalism is really to be open, accessible, and enlightening. So really coming back to the public interest mission of data journalism, that it really should be something that helps inform citizens, which is especially important to keep in mind right now during the pandemic.
Thanks, Eva. So it's really what it comes down to. The end goal is telling a story. I mean, most of us are journalists. That's why we're in this network. We produce journalism. We're wanting to find ways of producing better journalism. Journalism that more people are going to pay attention to. Journalism that's going to help people in their lives. So that's the end game. It's the story. But obviously it takes a lot of work beforehand to reach the point where you are ready to tell and publish and distribute the story. So on the right, this is kind of the graph of the rising value to the public, because we exist, our profession exists to serve the public. They are our audiences. Without our audiences, our jobs are meaningless. So we start off with working with our data in the red circle there, and data on its own is of very little value to the public. If we just shove a table in front of them, a table of numbers, they're not going to know what to do with it. They're not going to make sense of it. So data on its own has very little value to the public. If we then filter that data and we are able to say, okay, this person has the highest number of whatever it is, or this person earned the highest salary in Parliament in the last year, or this person or this village has the worst access to COVID facilities in hospitals, for example. We're starting to filter that data, ask questions of that data, and get answers that are meaningful to the audience. You can go a step further and visualize your data. So create a map or a chart, whether it's a pie chart or a bar chart or any other kind of chart, to show what you have found when you have filtered the data. That becomes easier for someone, an audience member, to digest, and they're more likely to engage with your content. And then the last point is the story. So combining what you have found in the data through visualizations or through text, including photos, videos, other kinds of multimedia, and publishing that as a story package. So that's kind of the process of rising value to the public. And there's two ways of getting started really with DataGen. One is to have a story idea that you're wanting to work on and then go and look for data to support that story. The other approach is if you already have data, maybe the government has recently released a significant data set and you're wanting to use that to produce good journalism, then you use that data to create your story. So it's either one approach or the other, generally.
So when you think about telling data stories, I think one thing that coronavirus has made us realize is that you need to focus your data investigation on the information that your audience needs to know. So we don't tell data stories for our own entertainment. Data stories can be dense, data stories can be difficult to access. And in order for your audience to take the time to read your data story, it really has to be about them. They have to see their concern and their interests reflected in the data. So if you're trying to help citizens understand how they can access coronavirus tests, if you want them to understand what the staffing is in the nearby hospitals, you really have to make sure that you have data for your community to relate to. If you're trying to influence policymakers, that's going to be another approach. You're going to have to find spending data, procurement data to show governments how they are succeeding or failing in serving citizens' healthcare needs. So before you start, you really want to think through who are you telling this story and what's the purpose of telling this story before you even get to the data.
So there's a couple of things we can do through our data journalism. One is to influence policy. Actually, it can be a very powerful thing. One of the things we're mandated to do as journalists is to hold the powerful to account. So through good, solid journalism, you can actually exert pressure on people who hold powerful positions in our cities and in our countries, and in turn that can influence policy in positive ways. So that's one aim. Data journalism can also help to inform public debates. Obviously there's millions of debates going on all the time around the world, and people are looking for reliable sources of information. There's so much fake news going around. That's one of the major problems we as journalists have to contend with, is cutting through the nonsense and giving our audiences only reliable, accurate information. So our data journalism, if done robustly and accurately, can help to reliably inform those public debates. Also expose wrongdoing, obviously, call out corruption, make sure people don't get away with crimes and corruption and that kind of stuff. We can also use data journalism or data stories to create awareness and understanding of complex issues. Sometimes it just really works much better to visualize a complex problem rather than try and describe it in text. So data can help us with that. And also explore options for solving real problems in the world. COVID-19 is a problem. How is data helping us to solve the problem? How is it informing vaccine strategy, for example? So as Eva was saying, you really need to go back to step one of being a journalist. We're all taught in our early days of our journalism studies that we should always be asking who, what, where, why, and when in every story. That you should ask exactly the same questions of your data when you are working with it. So who published it? What was their agenda? Is it a corporate with an agenda, or is it an NGO supposedly objective? What does the data show? Is there anything worth noting in it? When, how old is it? Is it current, or has it become outdated? Where was the data published? Where did you get it? Is it legal for you to have that data? Is it open data? Why? Correlate the data with the cause and effect analysis. And then how? So how was that data collected and produced? That's really important, because if there are problems with how people constructed that data, there's going to be problems with our stories. And then, we don't want to be held responsible for that. We need to make sure that we interrogate the data just as we would interrogate and verify the credibility of any source we use in our journalism, because essentially data is just another source.
So I want to talk a little bit about how you can tell coronavirus stories through alternative approaches to data. So one of my favorite coronavirus stories is Out of the Nation Newsplex in Kenya. And it includes absolutely no coronavirus data. So if you can go ahead one slide. This story, instead of looking at coronavirus data, it looked at how all of the other health services in Kenya have been impacted by COVID-19. So they looked at the number of children who had been vaccinated. They looked at the number of doctors available to patients in hospitals. They looked at the rates of childhood malnutrition and disease. So they told an entire coronavirus story by instead explaining how Kenya's vulnerable healthcare system has been impacted by coronavirus. So they're educating citizens not about like what happened yesterday, what number of people were tested yesterday. Instead, it's looking at what are the healthcare vulnerabilities in my community, and how can I use data to explain the weaknesses in our healthcare system.
Oops, that wasn't meant to happen. Let's just go back to I seem to have lost the Okay, sorry, just give me 1 second. I'm just gonna put this back onto the screen. There we go. So just a little bit more about the process of producing data journalism. This is the inverted pyramid, which is another way of looking at it. This is from Paul Bradshaw, who is one of the respected names of data journalism. But as I said a few moments ago, you either have a question that needs data or you have data that needs a question or a story. That's the two ways we kind of get into the data gen process. And starting from the top of that pyramid, the first step is to compile all your different data sources and then to clean them, which means getting rid of unnecessary columns or fixing formatting issues, making sure there are no spelling errors, that kind of thing. And then putting it into context or getting some contextual, relevance from that data. What does it mean? How can we make sense of it? What's it telling us? How do we make sense of it for our readers? Combining what the data tells us with other information we have collected for our story from other sources, such as experts we speak to or the public or any other source, combining all those sources into then a story package, which you can then communicate to your audience. I just want to show you this quickly as an example of how you can take an otherwise boring data set and visualize it and get stories out of it and make it interesting and make people want to talk about it. So this is a visualization all about marriage in South Africa. And this is just, so obviously the data set behind this would be showing us the ages of people who got married over the years and how many marriages per month, as we can see on the screen here. So that's not very interesting as it is over there. But when we start to look at the sort of the age gap between the husband and the wife in marriages in South Africa, we can start to see some very interesting anomalies. An anomaly is something that's out of the normal or unexpected, something that's very low or very high, very big, very small, anything that's out of the ordinary. So what we're seeing on this chart right here is that the vast majority of marriages are in this zone, which if you look on the x-axis is people, brides, the women, aged between 20 and 60. And those women are getting married to men aged between 20 and 60 on the y-axis. So that's your kind of the zone where most marriages occur. However, the outliers here would be points like this one, where the bride is 86 years old and the groom is 16. So that's a story in and of its own. Why is there a 16-year-old boy getting married to an 86-year-old bride? What's going on there? What's the story? All the way across on the other side of the graph, there's a bride who's 34 getting married to a groom who's 94. So also a story there. And here is a cute one. They are both in their 90s, 92 and 94. Never too old to fall in love. A nice feel-good story there. And on the other end of the scale is where it gets a little bit scary. You've got a bride age 12 and a groom age 20, or you've got a bride age 17 and a groom age 14. All of these little dots here are outliers, anomalies. Here the bride is 12. I mean, is that even legal? So all of these dots here, the bride is less than 16 years old. So what's going on there? Those are different stories waiting to be told or parts of the story. So this is how data, particularly when it's visualized like this, can help us to really find what is interesting or surprising or outrageous or inspirational about that data. That's why it's important to sort your data properly, to find these kinds of points, and then to further down the process to visualize it in the most compelling way. So they combined their findings from the data with this nice visualization, and obviously then the text, the story, which supported that. So the story now is a whole lot more interesting and shareable and compelling than if there was no chart, if it was just text. If it was just text, I'd just read it and be like, yeah, kind of interesting, but I'd quickly get bored. But as soon as I can actually see the surprising things about this data, it starts to mean a lot more to me, and I can start maybe wanting to comment on it or share it, engage with it, which is what we want with our audiences, particularly on social media. Okay, so that's just an example. We're going to talk quickly about the first phase or part of the data gen process, which is finding relevant and reliable data. So Google is pretty helpful in this regard. You can use straight out Google search as a first port of call for what you are looking for. You can also use Google in advanced ways, for example, to search for only specific file types from specific websites. For example, you might want to look for any Excel files that mention the word water that have been published on your government's website. Or you might want to look for any PDF documents that mention the word vaccine that have been published on a particular academic institution's website, for example. So you can really use Google in really strategic ways. And we don't have time to get into examples of that, but just so that you know, it is possible. Google also has a really useful tool called its dataset search, which looks like this, and it lets you search for datasets around the world. So I could search for coronavirus in, let's say, Kenya, and this is what's going to come up on the left here. It's found more than 100 datasets from various sources: the World Bank, Harvard, Statista.com, tradingeconomics.com, the World Bank's data catalog, which is another really useful tool. So you're finding data sets here, and then you can read about them. On the right, this is your metadata for that data set. Where is it? What's the time period? What's the description? So if you're not on mute, could you please mute? We have some background noise. Maybe I can just find that person here. Eva, would you mind just muting?
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, thanks. So it's describing the data here, and then if you think, oh, that sounds interesting, then you can click through to it and get the data sets on whatever the source site is. So that's a really good place to start if you have a particular thing in mind. So I want to look at, access to water in the Philippines, for example. You can search Google for water and Philippines, and I'm finding things like your reservoir water levels by dams, lakes, renewable water resources per capita. That's great. So yeah, this is a really good place to start if you have a topic in mind that you would like to research. So put in the keyword for that topic and then your name of your country, and see what you can find using this Google dataset search. Google Alerts enables you to receive an email automatically whenever a new term or phrase is published online. So this is great if you're looking for, perhaps you want to be notified when your name is published, because you want to see how people are using your stories. Maybe they're copying them and using them on other websites. Maybe they're saying things about you. Maybe you're researching a particular person or particular concept, and you want to be emailed immediately as soon as anything is published about that. You would use Google Alerts to set that up for yourself. Eva?
Okay, yeah, so we're not going to take you through every single data source we've suggested here, but what the message we want to tell you is we've both been doing data journalism training for over a decade. We've worked with hundreds of journalists, and the problem for all of the journalists we've worked with has never been lack of data. We've never met a journalist in a training program that couldn't do a story because they don't have data. There is always data available for you to produce a meaningful story. It might not be exactly the story that you wanted to write. It might not be exactly the data set that you were looking for. But like I mentioned earlier, in Kenya, they wanted to tell a coronavirus story. They didn't have all the coronavirus data, so they did a very good story about Kenya's healthcare system. So what we're going to take you through here is we're just going to briefly scroll through different slides that you can explore in your own time, where you can find different data sources. You can find data sources about health. You can find data sources about coronavirus. But don't let data be the issue preventing you from doing data journalism. What I always tell my trainees is use the data that you have, not the data that you wish you had. Okay, there's a story that we all dream of if we had the perfect data set, but reality is we have to work with the sources of information and the sources of data that we have. And the more you practice and the better you get with the data that you do have available, when you do get your dream data set, you'll know exactly what to do with it. So this Our World in Data site has lots of good information about vaccination data. It might not tell you exactly when your township is going to get vaccinated, but it will have a lot of great intro data on coronavirus. Once you get used to using these data dashboards, it will also be much easier for you to identify exactly what data set you want within a dashboard. So the more you use these dashboards, the more familiar you get with them. So yeah, I don't think, Michael, we don't have to go through the actual dashboard yourself. You guys can, all of these are linked. So this is why we shared the hyperlink. I would take a couple of hours after this course and explore. You can see Michael scrolling through now. Explore the data that's available. Explore the sources of the data and see what you can make use of for your country.
Yeah, so it's mostly vaccine-related data from around the world, which is obviously super topical at the moment. You can see that data charted, line charts, bar charts. You can see it visualized on a map as well, which is great. And you can also then see the data as a table behind that visualization. Every data visualization has to have a data set behind it, or a table. So we can then obviously sort that table. Maybe we're interested in looking at the highest change in vaccinations, and that's Israel. So Israel is leading the game in terms of making progress with vaccinations. On the other end of the scale, we've got these kinds of countries which are not making much progress, and so forth. So that's different ways of looking at the same data. This tab will tell you the metadata of that data. So, you know, who's the publisher, when was it published, where did it come from. It's really important for you to know how that data was created, who created it, and why. And then there's a download tab. So if you want to work with that data as yourself, you can download it as a CSV, which is a type of an Excel file, and you can then work with it on your own. So that is together with Google Dataset Search and the World Bank resource, which we're going to get to, and this, I think those are your top three data sources or first ports of call to find great data related to COVID that you can use for your journalism. Here it's telling you for each country where the data came from. So obviously the more official the source, the better. A lot of these are from national institutions, you know, Health Commission, Ministry of Health, Government of the UK, National Health Board in Estonia, Ministry of Health in Kuwait, and so forth. Where did that data come from? When was it updated? And which vaccines does it deal with? Obviously, multiple vaccines now available. So yeah, that's a great resource, and the link to it is at the bottom of that slide, which you can access from the link I gave you at the beginning of the session. Open Africa is another great place to take a look at if you're looking for data specifically on the African continent. So a lot of data sets you will find here and not find them easily anywhere else. So this is a good one to consult if you're looking for open data sets specifically related to African countries. The World Bank has an open data portal, which is at data.worldbank.org. And this is another super comprehensive and helpful resource. So I would definitely add that to your list of websites to take a look at when you are trying to find relevant data for whatever it is that you are working on. This is another one made possible by USAID, where you can look at demographic and health indicators across the world, 90 different countries. So things like, access to water and employment and agriculture and all that kind of stuff is all housed here. And so this is called statcompiler.com. This is another one which Eva can talk to.
Yeah, I think this one's really important because I think data journalists often feel like they are the only ones looking for data. I promise you, you are not the first person to look for data in your country. There is an entire data community in your country that has been working on this issue, and most of them want to collaborate. So this website lists local data projects from all around the world. It's organized by region. And it's looking at any data related to COVID-19. So that might be cases, it might be tests, it might be vaccines, it might be school closure data, it might be unemployment data. But this is a great place to try to figure out who in your community is already doing data work and what organizations are helping liberate that data. So I definitely suggest if you're looking for country-specific data, check out the data for COVID-19 collaborative and see if there's a group already working in your area. Usually they're very eager to work with journalists because they compile all this data and then they often don't have users for it. So they're very excited to work with journalists who are actually interested in getting this data and information to the public. Another similar project is the Sustainable Development Goals site has also put together a data resource page that really helps you identify national and subnational COVID-19 data. So again, it's nice enough to have these global databases, but if you're looking for more localized COVID-19 data on a community level, whether it's vulnerability or vaccination rates, there's really much more granular data available, and that's a big list of resources by country that you can see if your country has data available.
So just to get back to the metadata thing briefly, you can find data, but how do you know if it's actually reliable? I mean, you can talk to anyone who claims they saw an event or a scene unfold. How do you know what they're telling you is the truth? Same with data. How do you know what the data is telling you is true and reliable? So we have to look for metadata, which, as we learned, is data that describes a data set. So things like title, description, license, publisher, and contact info. Really, really important that that kind of information is present and that you consult it so that you can make decisions about whether or not you want to trust that data. So just why are we telling stories with data? It's because data by itself is not very interesting, as we can all agree. We need to make sense of that data, and that's where the real skill comes in. And when we turn that data into information, that's when things start to get interesting, and that's when audiences start to pay attention. Numbers on their own are nothing. We have to make those numbers mean something. And that's where your skill as a journalist comes in. And then it should always be prioritizing the audience. I said that without our audience, we are nothing. So how do we create content that is most relevant to an audience? And what is relevancy? How does information become relevant to someone? It's when they can use that information to improve their lives or improve their knowledge about what's going on around them. So what you need to give someone an incentive to read your story or to look at your video. So what is that incentive? How are you making their life easier or better, or making them more informed through your journalism? So that's always kind of something to just keep in mind.
So I think one issue that we see in a lot of countries is coronavirus has stopped remittances, right? So all the workers that used to work in another country are not sending money home anymore. So there's this huge question of what is happening to poverty rates, what is happening to all the families that are dependent on remittances. So this is a story that you can answer with data. So you can see, if you go to the next slide,
You can
there's
just click
there's
a control.
okay. It's an issue that's being covered across the country, and what we're seeing as people do data stories is it's really the poor that are becoming poorer because of the dependency on remittances. If you're trying to serve your audience, if you're trying to reduce inequality, it's a really important coronavirus stories that there is quite a lot of data about. There's a lot of data about how much remittances have changed and how and poverty levels have changed in a country since the beginning of the coronavirus. So all of these, I suggest you take your time and read through all of these stories. I think the secret that data journalists don't talk about a lot is mostly we all just copy each other's ideas. So if one story worked really well in Kenya, it'll probably work well in Indonesia. If it worked well in India, try it in Nigeria. You'd be surprised about how many problems are the same across the world. You'd be surprised about inequality, health, education. All of these problems are similar, so learn from what each other is doing. So the first thing I always do when I do a data story is I read how other people have covered it in other places. So you're going to see a lot of examples here for how other people have covered similar stories.
Michael, Eva, this is Bea. There have been a few questions in the chat box. One was related to what are some of the skills needed to be a good data journalist? Can you answer maybe a few if you see them pop up? The other one was related to data sources, which I think you have already covered.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, yeah. So I think we're basically the skills that make a good journalist are the same skills that make a good data journalist. You have to be curious about your topic. You have to be willing to take a really deep dive into whatever topic that you're covering. And I think this next slide that Michael's got up, that data journalism is persuasive, is something that journalists can be a little bit uncomfortable with. Because what you do when you do data analysis is you come up with an original conclusion. You might be saying that this part of the country is completely neglected. There's been no coronavirus testing. There are no doctors. There are no resources in this part of the country according to the data. So you are making an argument, which is not something that you might normally be comfortable with. So as a data journalist, I think diligence and checking your work is really what's most essential to becoming an effective data storyteller.
Thank you, Eva.
So an issue that we see coming up again and again is we know that coronavirus has cost a lot of children their access to education. This is a really important data story that you can use to persuade lawmakers to pay attention to who is going to suffer most because of lack of access to education. In India, there was a story looking specifically at how girls are being pushed out of school. So the data suggests that girls from poorer families are being pushed out because they need those girls to work in order to make up for the loss of income because of the pandemic lockdowns. So this is really trying to persuade policymakers to pay attention to these girls that are dropping out of school. So without the data analysis, the journalist would not necessarily know which group of children is suffering the most because of pandemic-related education interruptions. In your country, it might be an ethnic minority. It might be poor children. But data can really help you figure out who are the victims in this situation and persuade policymakers to make better decisions. Okay,
Yeah,
so
another,
go ahead.
go for it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just to make the point that another another way that data can make storytelling more effective is that it raises awareness, as we were saying, on key issues, important and compelling issues that might otherwise get lost. So another example of this would be the issue of people going hungry. Eva, this example, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a big opportunity to cover results of some of these survey data. So there was a big survey done in the Philippines looking at how many families are hungry since the start of the lockdown. And journalists really have the opportunity to elevate these kinds of stories and these kinds of surveys to show that, look, our data suggests that there are this many millions of children located in these parts of the city or these parts of the country that desperately need attention based on the data. And it's easy then to later measure whether or not the government response was adequate in feeding those children. So the government can very easily say, yes, we launched a feeding program and everybody's fine now, but you'll actually have the data to show and to measure whether government strategies to feed hungry families during the lockdown has been effective or not.
Michael, Eva, can you address using data for broadcast journalism when you can't really visualize necessarily? Is there any tips you might have?
Yeah, actually, most of the stories that we're mentioning here don't use data visualization. Most of it is really about storytelling, about how can you tell an effective story, often through a really strong character. So often even more effective than visualization is finding one of those families that hasn't been fed in the Philippines and explaining your data findings through them. So data is really just another source of information. It's almost like saying, is it better to call people and do interviews on the phone or in person? As long as you get the information, as long as you get do your data analysis, you can tell that story in whatever medium you could reach your audience at. And I think often people are not focused on audiences and they're not meeting people where they are, so they assume that they should put things online. But I think some of the most effective data journalism in several regions, including in Africa, has been in print media, has been on television, has been on radio. So just because we hear about online storytelling, I think we should definitely not assume that online or interactive data storytelling is the most effective.
Yeah, I mean, radio is all about talking, and what data helps us to do is to find talking points, find things to talk about with our audiences, whether those audiences are on the other end of a radio or whether they're looking at a screen. So, by analyzing the data sets of the marriages, for example, between men and women of different ages in South Africa, we might have been looking through that data set and then seen, the oldest marriage was between a 94-year-old man and a 92-year-old woman. Let's try and track them down, interview them, ask them about their love story, for example. Or we might want to look at the other end of the scale and look at the issue of why are there so many illegal marriages happening with girls under the age of 16, for example. And the data can help you to identify those talking points, which make for great discussion on air.
Thank you. We have two questions, one from Ray and one from Kanu. So Ray, go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to ask, what is more interesting to discover, let's say, scoops, stories that are not readily available, data from, let's say, data about Lagos, a city in Nigeria, from the World Bank and other big organizations like the UN, or messy data that is published by, let's say, the Lagos City Council itself, which is more interesting as a journalist to dig for really interesting stories?
I mean, I think that's almost the same question. Is it better to interview someone on the phone or in an email? Like, you can. There's no such thing as like a good source of data or a bad source of data. It depends entirely on the story you're trying to tell, right? And I think the more you are informed you are about the topic that you're covering, like if you're an expert in Nigeria's garbage collection and waste management system, if you've done your research, you know exactly who's got the best waste management data, right? But if you have this vague idea like, oh, I think waste management would maybe be an interesting topic, maybe I should look for some data about it, you know, that would be backwards. Like first you need to research your topic, figure out who's got the data, figure out what the past coverage looks like, and then you're going to find your scoop, right? But I don't think data is not a shortcut to a scoop. Unfortunately, there's no magic to it, right? You still have to do your research. You still have to learn about your topic. Then you know the right questions to ask of your data and where to find that data.
Okay, let's move on. Just another example here of the government managing the economy. Eva, do you want to say anything more about this, or can we move through?
There was another question. Sorry, guys.
sorry.
Nkanu had raised the hand, but I don't know if he still has a question.
I'm here. The question I have is, let's assume you're in a destination. I know someone mentioned Lagos. You're in a destination like Lagos, and the data that the local authorities have is not adequate. And so, let's say you were depending upon an organization like, say, the United Nations Children's Fund, you know, for data on, say, birth registrations, infant mortality as a result of malaria, and all of that. You know within you that the data is not adequate, but it's just, you know, somehow something you can work with, but it's not an exact representation of what we have on ground. How do you go around that?
So again, like I said, it's important to remember that you're not the first person to look for quality data in your country. So you can see here on the screen, this is DataFight. This is actually a Nigerian data journalism outfit. They have a data portal. You can see the data portal tab there where they have data sets that they vetted. In Nigeria, there's also an NGO called Budget, which does a lot of the data processing for you. But one thing to keep in mind is there is no completely true, completely reliable source of information. That's why as journalists, we interview 3 sources, right? We interview 3 different people about the same topic, and we know the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's the same with data. Data is just a collection of individual incidents. So it's just as prone to error as every single one of those incidents that was collected, right? So again, like I said, data is not magic. The best you can do is learn, just like you learn about your sources. You know who's going to lie to you and who's going to tell you the truth. There's been groups in these countries that have been looking at the data for a long time. They know which data set is lying and which data set is truer. So talking to a lot of these people that are doing data provision, India's got really good data provision. So does Nigeria. Most countries, like I said, have a startup data community, and getting to know them and letting them guide you about how reliable data sources are is really a great way to get started in doing data storytelling. So yeah, you can see here with DataFight, they've got about 400 demographic data sets. lots of agricultural data sets, 250 education data sets. What I always suggest is start telling data stories with the data that's available. Build up your skills using that data, and especially I think DataFight even has a little request box where you can chat with somebody for help. So make use of those resources. Make sure that you're building your skills with the support of other people, and then as you go, you'll be able to access the more difficult data sets and tell the more controversial stories. Okay, and then I think one thing I wanted to touch on, often what gets forgotten when we do data storytelling are the people that are kind of invisible. So a lot of the people who have most been affected by the lockdown are people or gig workers or the informal laborers. So it's really important to look out for data and look out for research that tries to measure how these populations have been affected. So in India Spend did a fascinating story about how female farmers have been especially impacted by the pandemic. We knew that farmers in general were pretty affected, but they actually found that there was this group of women farmers that were especially affected because of their lack of access to financial support mechanisms. So they have low benefit coverage and low access to banks in general. So I think that was a really interesting example of how digging into the data really revealed this invisible community being affected by the pandemic in ways that we didn't necessarily expect.
Okay, so we're reaching the end of the webinar, but if you are interested in furthering your knowledge in data journalism, there's loads of resources out there to help you. One of the best ones is this one called the Data Journalism Handbook. This is the second version of this handbook. It's available as a physical book and as a downloadable PDF for free. And it really is kind of the Bible of data journalism. Delving into more of what it is, what it can do, how you can do it, what opportunities and limitations you might encounter, who and what is involved in making sense of data. A lot of good case studies and examples as well. So if you're wanting a great resource to deepen your knowledge on data journalism, this would be a great place to start. Free resources. Yeah.
And I've written a chapter in the handbook that focuses on data for, by, and about marginalized communities. And it's got case studies from Kenya and Pakistan and Kyrgyzstan. So there is, although some of the examples are Western, half of the examples are from data journalists working in the global South that are doing really important work. So I definitely suggest everybody check it out. And again, a lot of the learning happens is by learning how other people's processes and how other people got to the story. So yeah, I definitely suggest you take a look, and it is being translated into several languages.
Wow. So here's a look at the contents in this handbook. So it's really quite in depth, and yeah, it's just available right over here as a PDF, freely available. So check that out, download it, save it to your tablets, and happy bedtime reading.
Bedtime reading.
Yeah.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to either raise your hand, get on the mic, or drop them in the chat box. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for presenting this, for giving such a wealth of information to everybody. And I also want to say thank you to everyone who took the time to join this webinar. I hope you found it helpful. I dropped in the evaluation form. We would love your feedback and also ideas of trainings that you would like in the future. There is one question. Let me see whose hands is up. Please just, Murtaza, maybe get on the mic and pose your question.
Yes, I just want to say that how we can pitch the ideas in future.
The ideas for webinars, you can shoot me an email, and feel free to, I dropped in the evaluation form for this webinar, and we have a question in there about ideas for the future. But you can always reach me, and I'll put my email in the chat box.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And if any of you joined late and you're wanting the link to the slides, I'll just bring it up again. There it is. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming, and we hope you got a lot out of this.
And we
Yeah.
hope to be able to offer more data journalism content in the future. But again, I think my biggest piece of advice for everyone interested in data journalism is to read more data journalism. So go through the presentation, read examples of stories, and look how they did those stories. The question about what are the essential skills for a data journalist, there isn't one. Curiosity and persistence are the only thing that you need to become a data journalist. So if you have the drive, if you have the passion about telling stories to your community, you can definitely be a data journalist, and we're always available to help you, link you up with resources that you might need to tell those stories.
Awesome. You said diligence, Eva, tenacity maybe as well.
Yep.
But then tenacity is a quality that most journalists have to have. Thank you guys very much. There's a link to the slides. There is evaluation. Shoot me an email if you have ideas, and any feedback is welcome on the evaluation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I see we have one more hand from the lung.
One more hand. Go ahead.
Oh, that's disappeared now.
Yes. Thank you very much. Very helpful. Yeah. This is Carol from Philippines. If we make an article, is it all right if we get your opinion? If you can take a look at it, and then give us feedback.
Yeah, we'd be happy to take a look. You can contact us via, what's the best way for contacting? I guess we're both on Twitter. You can DM us on Twitter if you're on Twitter. Otherwise, just use our instant news email addresses.
Can you drop your Twitter handle on the chat box?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane from Rwanda, for joining. Yeah, Saltwag. Okay, cool.
That's me. Yeah.
And I don't know if Eva has Twitter, but maybe, yeah, she put the handle.
And good luck, and definitely tag us on any data stories that you produce, and we'll definitely share them via Twitter and via our other networks.
Yeah, cool. Tag.
Thanks,
and
everyone.
even put them on the data Facebook Health Journalism page. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.